name is Jessie List, and today I'm going to be instructing you on how to teach English to English language learners with the utilization of cognates. For those of you who may not know, a cognate is a word that appears to be incredibly similar in both the target language and the native language. To give you a little bit of context, my lesson today would be delivered to second graders who are all native Spanish speakers. Now, I've decided to choose this strategy to teach because I am both an English education and a Spanish education major, so there's a big chance that I will be dealing with Spanish speakers in my future career. Additionally, I attended a conference a few years ago for English teachers in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I attended a workshop that executed how to use cognates in the instruction of English. So I decided to use the knowledge that I gleaned from that workshop to guide me through this project and through this video. Now, this lesson that I'm going to be delivering to you will be for second graders, and I'm saying that because the story that I'm teaching is very simple. However, it offers an opportunity for students to hear the language in a meaningful way, which research done by Stephen Krashen supports. Meaning is a very important factor when it comes to learning and retaining, because if the learner hears the language in a meaningful and contextualized way, they will be more likely to remember what was taught. So one way to teach using cognates is to use a PACE lesson, which is centered around storytelling. Ahler's episode hypothesis contests that learners learn best whenever the lesson has a beginning, middle, and end, and a good way to structure a lesson with a beginning, middle, and end is to use a story. So with that being said, if I were to use cognates to teach English language learners, I would use this story and we would focus on vocabulary dealing with emotions. So I'm going to read to you this story in the way that I would read it to my second grade learners. Now, I am going to give you a little bit of information that you might need as I'm reading this, because I don't have people here with me to act as the learners. However, when I go to read this story, I would ask that my learners raise their hand as I'm reading when they think they hear a cognate. And when students raise their hand, I would stop and have a little bit of a discussion about what word they think the cognate is and why they think it's a cognate. So the story that I would read is called We Are All Friends. And I would make sure that the story has plenty of visuals that are colorful and that best exemplify what each vocabulary word will be for this unit. We are all friends. It's great to have friends, but it's even greater when your friends are different from you. Meet Lou. Lou loves wearing his red shirt. Lou is very anxious. Anxious. Now I have what each vocabulary word will be in red. I'm not sure if students would see the red and just immediately assume that it's a cognate, but if they do not, I would use the color red to make sure that it sticks in their memory, that it stands out to them as being a cognate. Meet Sally. Unlike Lou, Sally is very calm. Calm. Meet Joe. Joe is very timid. Timid. And here is Bob. Bob is quite content. Content. friends are different. Lou is anxious. Anxious. Sally is calm. Calm. Joe is timid. Timid. And Bob is content. Content. But Lou, Sally, and Joe, and Bob celebrate their differences. And they are all friends. So, through this PACE lesson, the P stands for presentational. So you present the vocabulary using the storytelling method, which I have just done. Now, from here, you have to, utilize the vocabulary in a way that is meaningful and that the learners will remember. So after I present the story, I would go back to it and we would talk about what words these students raised their hand for as cognates. Now, like I said earlier, I have the cognates in red, so I obviously would not point them out to the students. I would have them try to deduce and figure out what the cognates are, but hopefully they would identify anxious as a cognate for Spanish, because my learners are Spanish learners. They are native Spanish speakers. So we have anxious. And because I want my students to compare the English word to the Spanish word that they already know, I would have each word written in Spanish and English. So I would have the English word with the visual so that they have something to associate the visual with, or the word with. And I would have the visual up here, anxious, and then I would have the Spanish word next to it. Now I know that if the learner is younger, there's a chance that they might not be able to read yet. That is why I would use this lesson for second graders, because hopefully by that point, even if they can't read yet in the target language, they can read in their native language. So like I said, I would present the English word with a visual, and I would have the Spanish word next to it so that they can compare the two, because as I said before, cognates are words that appear to be almost the same in both languages. So I would want them to see this similarity. So we would have content, contento, anxious, ansioso, calm, calmado, and timid, tímido. Now from there, after we have seen, and I'll zoom in closer so you get a better idea. Here we go. Now from there, after we have seen the comparisons, I would want my students to talk about what is similar about these words and what is different. Now this is where it gets into a little bit of analysis, so some corrective feedback might be necessary on the instructor's part so that students are working towards the correct analysis that the teacher is trying to target. So I would ask students, what letters are different from the Spanish word and the English word, what suffixes and prefixes are different. For instance, in English we have calm, but in Spanish we have calmado. So of course, ado is the difference between calm and calmado. We have timid and tímido, only an O is different between those two words. Ansioso is a little bit different. The X sound is not a very common sound in Spanish, so it would make sense that it's not in the Spanish word for anxious. And then we have content, contento. So I know, like I said, that these learners are only in second grade, so they might not be able to do a linguistic analysis. For instance, they're not going to say, oh, it seems to me that in Spanish, it's very common for adjectives to have ado at the end, but that's not the same case in English. No, your learners are 7 or 8 years old, so they're not going to come to this kind of fancy analysis. However, they could at least recognize the difference, and then the more you teach these cognates and other cognates, the more the students will be less likely to make grammatical errors by saying, she is calmado, because they know that adjectives in English do not have the ado suffix at the end. So these 3 strategies methods that I just explained to you could be utilized if the instructor chooses to use cognates to teach English to their learners. Like I said, you could start by presenting the vocabulary with the utilization of a story. This would contextualize the words and put them in a meaningful and exciting context so that students are more likely to remember and retain the vocabulary. From there, you would want to present the vocabulary again. Don't just move on from the story and get into the activities. Present it in a way that is more detailed, and be sure to use images so that they have something to associate the word with. From there, when you present the vocabulary again, you could present the Spanish word for them. If your learners are Spanish language speakers, obviously if they're French, if they're Mandarin, something like that. Although there would not be many cognates between Mandarin and English, but use the appropriate native language. And then from there, you would have a little bit of a discussion about the differences between the words. Like I said, some fancy kind of elaborate analysis might not occur if your students are very young, but you would at least want them to recognize the patterns and the differences between the words. And those are just some 3 ways to use cognates when instructing English to English language learners. And from there, you could do activities where the students practice the language. When I taught this lesson to second graders at East Pike Elementary School, we finished the lesson by playing a game of charades. I would whisper the word to the students in their ear, and they would act it out, and then the students would have to guess what emotion the other student is acting out. This was a great activity, one, because the student acting had to interpret what I was telling them. If I said anxious, they had to remember, what does it mean to be anxious? What was the person doing in the picture? And then when they acted it out, the students had to interpret what the other student was acting out, and they also had to recall what the English word was for ansioso. And also, it's a great activity because it gets second graders up and moving around, which is so important. They have so much energy, and they aren't going to want to sit in a chair for 42 minutes. So that was a way to end my lesson in a meaningful and fun way. So that is, those are a few methods that you could use to incorporate cognates into your English instruction. Like I said, my name is Jessie, and I hope that you have enjoyed this instructional video.